My world smells of paper and ink, of old glue and brewing tea. I own a bookstore, a small, quiet corner of the world called The Last Page. It's a tangible place. When you pick up a book, you can feel the weight of it in your hands. You can trace the letters on the cover. It's real, my life. I thought was the same, grounded, authentic, and bound in the sturdy, reliable cover of my marriage to Morgan. Morgan's world was different. It was abstract, a place of numbers and algorithms I couldn't comprehend. She was a high-flying financial analyst for a major investment bank. At least, that's what she told me. Her job was a whirlwind of acronyms, ETFs, CDOs, quantitative easing. When she spoke of it, her eyes would light up, and she'd talk about market volatility and arbitrage with a passion I reserved for first editions. I didn't understand the language, but I understood her. I understood the fierce intelligence, the drive, the ambition, and I was so incredibly proud of her. My bookstore pays its own rent, and maybe for my tea habit, but not much more. It was Morgan's salary that paid for our life, our beautiful, minimalist house with its floor-to-ceiling windows, our vacations to places I'd only read about in books, the quiet, steady comfort of knowing the bills were always paid. She handled the finances. You deal with the stories. Sadie, she'd say, kissing my forehead, I'll deal with the numbers. It was our arrangement ... It worked. Her job was demanding. The hours were brutal. There were sudden market crises that would have her cloistered in her home office for days. The door shut, her voice a low, intense murmur on calls. To Hong Kong or London, there were business trips, sudden and frequent, to investor conferences I couldn't attend because of their high-security nature. I accepted it all. It was the price of her success, of our comfortable life. I was the supportive wife to a brilliant woman in a high-stakes world. That was the story of us ... And for 10 years, I believed it with all my heart. The first sentence of the new story arrived on a Tuesday. It wasn't a dramatic, explosive beginning. It was a quiet one, a single, cream-colored envelope from the Internal Revenue Service that looked official and boring. I opened it with a letter opener, careful not to tear the contents, assuming it was a standard notice. The letter was polite, bureaucratic ... It informed us of a discrepancy in our tax filing from 3 years ago, a mismatch between the income we'd reported and the records they had on file. It mentioned a W-2 form from Morgan's employer, a prestigious investment bank that didn't seem to align with their data. Please have your employer submit a corrected copy of the form for our records. The letter concluded it was an annoyance, a piece of administrative red tape. I made a mental note to ask Morgan about it, but she was in the middle of a major acquisition, working around the clock, and I didn't want to bother her with something so trivial. I can handle this. I thought I'm a capable adult, so I looked up the number for the human resources department of her firm. Good afternoon, Sterling Gables. How can I direct your call? The cheerful voice on the other end chirped. Hello. I said, my name is Sadie Vance. My wife is Morgan Vance. I'm just calling to request a copy of her W-2 from 2022. We received a notice from the IRS about a discrepancy. Of course, the voice said ... Let me just pull up her file. Can you spell the last name for me? Vance, I said patiently. There was a pause, the sound of typing ... then more silence. I'm sorry, the woman said, her voice now laced with confusion. I'm not finding anyone by that name currently employed with us. Oh, I said with a small laugh. She's been there for years. She's a senior analyst in the derivatives department. Ma'am, the woman said, and her tone was now cautious, deliberate. I'm showing a Morgan Vance in our system. Yes, but her employment with Sterling Gables was terminated in July of 2022. Boards didn't register at first. Terminated? No, that was impossible. Morgan loved her job. She was the star of her department. I think there must be a mistake. I said, my voice tight. She's she's at work right now. I'm sorry, ma'am, the woman said, her professional sympathy grating on my nerves. Our records are quite clear. Her last day was July 14th, 2022. There's nothing more recent than that. I hung up the phone. My hand was trembling. The bookstore. Usually my sanctuary felt suddenly cold. It had to be a mistake. A massive, ridiculous corporate error. People fell through the cracks of these huge companies all the time. I repeated this to myself all day, a mantra against the rising tide of unease in my chest. When Morgan came home that night, I was waiting for her. I tried to sound casual. Hey, strangest thing happened today, I said, handing her a glass of wine. I called your HR department to get a copy of an old tax form, and they said you don't work there anymore. Can you believe it? They must have really messed up their records. I watched her face for a split second, a single terrifying beat of silence. I saw something flicker in her eyes, panic. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a look of weary amusement. She took a long sip of wine. Oh, for God's sake, she sighed, rubbing her temples. Bureaucrats, I swear. She sank onto the sofa. Babe, I didn't want to bore you with the details, but the bank went through a major restructuring. My entire division was technically spun off into a new subsidiary. It's a separate legal entity for tax purposes, to protect the parent company from certain types of risk. It's all incredibly dull and complicated, but it means that on paper, I don't work for Sterling Dables anymore. It's all part of the same company. Just got compartmentalized / Don't worry about it. I'll call legal in the morning and have them sort it out with the IRS. It made sense. It was logical, complicated, and full of the corporate jargon she always used. I was flooded with relief. Of course, there was a simple explanation. I have let myself get worked up over nothing. I curled up next to her on the sofa, leaned my head on her shoulder, and apologized for doubting her. Don't be silly, she murmured, kissing the top of my head. It's confusing stuff. That's why I handle it. But the seed was planted, and in the days that followed, it began to germinate. I started noticing things, small things that I had previously accepted as part of her high-pressure life. Her work phone that sat on the counter all weekend and never rang. Her vagueness when I asked about her colleagues. How's David doing? I'd ask, remembering a name she'd mentioned months ago. David? She'd reply, her brow furrowed. Oh, he moved to the London office. I work with a new team now. The names were always changing. The team was always new. I started looking at our bank statements online. The large deposits were there, just as they always had been. But Morgan's explanation started to fray at the edges. The money didn't come from Sterling Dable's payroll or any subsidiary with a similar name. The deposits were wire transfers from an LLC. I'd never heard of Argentum Holdings LLC. It sounded vaguely financial, but when I Googled it, I found nothing. No website, no corporate registration, just a ghost. The doubt grew into annoying, ever-present anxiety. I felt like a character in a spy novel. Who is this woman I shared a bed with? The lies, if they were lies, were so vast, so all-encompassing, they seemed impossible. To fake a job for 3 years. To leave the house every morning in a power suit and go. It was insane .. And yet, the HR department certainty, the ghost LLC, the flicker of panic in her eyes. One morning, I decided to do something I never thought I would do. I decided to follow her. I felt shameful, a profound violation of the trust that was the bedrock of our marriage. But what if that bedrock was already sand? I told her I was going to the flower market, an early morning run I sometimes made for the shop. I watched her leave the house, Looking impeccable in a dark gray suit, her briefcase in hand, I waited 5 minutes, then I got in my car. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. She drove her usual route towards the financial district, and for a moment, I was flooded with relief. I was wrong. I was a paranoid, untrusting fool. But then, just a few blocks from her old office building, she turned. She drove away from the gleaming towers of glass and steel. She headed towards a grittier, industrial part of town, a place of old warehouses and nondescript commercial buildings. She pulled into a small private parking garage. Beneath a drab brick building with no signage, I parked across the street, my car half hidden by a delivery truck. I waited. What was this place? A secret office for her subsidiary. An hour passed, then another, just after 10 o'clock. She emerged from the building, but she wasn't alone. She was with two other women and a man. They didn't look like investment bankers. They were dressed casually, almost scruffily. They were laughing, smoking cigarettes on the sidewalk. Still in her suit, looked completely out of place, and yet perfectly comfortable with them. She wasn't their boss. She was their peer, one of the women. Clapped her on the back. It was a gesture of easy, familiar camaraderie. This was her new team. I watched them for 20 minutes. They weren't discussing mergers or acquisitions. They were arguing about a sports team. Then they all went back inside. I sat in my car, my mind reeling. This wasn't a corporate office. This was something else entirely. But what? And the biggest question of all, the one that screamed in my mind, if her job was a lie, where was the money coming from? How were we living this beautiful, expensive life? The answer I knew had to be in her home office, the one room in the house that was unequivocally hers. The door was always locked when she wasn't in it. Client confidentiality. Babe, she'd always said, sec rules, can't be too careful. Now, her excuses seemed less like professional caution and more like a guard tower. That night, I waited until she was sound asleep. I crept out of bed and went to her office door. It was locked. I went to the kitchen and got a fin. Metal skewer from a drawer. My hands were shaking as I slid it into the keyhole. I had read about picking simple locks in mystery novels. It felt absurd, unreal. But after a few minutes of clumsy fumbling, I heard a soft click. The door swung open. The office was dark and smelled of her perfume. It was dominated by a massive desk and a bank of computer monitors. I turned on the desk lamp. Her main laptop was there, closed. I knew I wouldn't be able to get into it, but next to it was another, older laptop, one I hadn't seen before. It was plugged in but closed. I opened it. It whirred to life without a password. The screen was a mess of open windows, spreadsheets, charts. But they weren't stock market charts. They were ... odds, payouts. Websites for online poker. My eyes scanned the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There were folders on the desktop. One was labeled Argentum. I clicked it open. Inside were bank records for the Ghost LLC, and it all became terrifyingly clear. Argentum Holdings wasn't an investment firm. It was the account she used for her gambling. There were massive deposits from online casinos. There were huge wire transfers to and from accounts in places like Macau and Monaco. There were spreadsheets tracking her wins and losses, and the numbers were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, moving in and out in a dizzying, constant flow. It wasn't a salary. It was winnings and losses. There were long stretches of red, of devastating losses that mirrored the time she had been stressed and overworked, locked in her office during a market crisis. And there were euphoric winning streaks that corresponded with our surprise vacations and expensive gifts. I leaned back in her chair, the leather cool against my skin. The whole world had shifted on its axis. Morgan, my brilliant, reliable wife, the financial analyst, was a professional poker player, a high-stakes gambler, the long hours, the secrecy, the sudden trips to investor conferences, the market volatility. It all clicked into place, a perfect, horrifying mosaic of lies. Our entire life, our beautiful home, my quiet, stable existence, was a bluff. It was built on the turn of a card, on a river of luck, and for 3 years, I hadn't even known I was at the table. I closed the laptop and crept back to bed, lying next to Morgan. I felt a chasm open between us, wider and deeper than any ocean. I was sleeping next to a stranger who had gambled with our life, with my trust, with everything I held dear. The betrayal was so profound, so fundamental, it wasn't even about the lie of the job anymore. It was about the lie of the person. I thought I knew. The story of us wasn't just a misprint. The entire book was a forgery. The confrontation happened the next night. I couldn't wait. I couldn't spend another minute playing the part of the unsuspecting wife. I waited for her to come home, to shed her power suit costume. I found her in the kitchen, pouring a glass of wine. "How was your day at the ... office?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. She turned, a smile on her face that faltered when she saw my expression. "It was fine," she said cautiously. "Long day." "I'm sure," I said. Is it hard to keep track of it all? The market, fluctuations, the big bluffs. I saw that flicker of panic in her eyes again. This time it stayed. "What are you talking about, Sadie?" "I know, Morgan," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion that was raging inside me. "I know about Argentum Holdings. I know about the trips to Macau that you called investor conferences. I know that you don't work for Sterling Dables. I know that you haven't for 3 years." She leaned back against the counter, the wine glass held tightly in her hand. All the color drained from her face. The mask was gone. For the first time in years, I felt like I was seeing the real her, and she was terrified. "How?" She whispered, "Sadie, I can explain." "Can you?" I asked. "And can you explain why you let me believe our life was built on a salary when it was built on a deck of cards? Can you explain the sheer arrogance it took to lie to me every single day for 3 years? I was ashamed." She finally burst out, her voice cracking. "I got fired, Sadie. I was laid off, and I was too proud, too ashamed to tell you. I failed. I didn't know what to do." "So you started gambling?" "I was always good at it," she said, her voice dropping. "I started small, online, and I won. I kept winning. I won enough to cover the bills, to keep things normal. I was protecting you. I was trying to give you the life you deserved." "The life I deserved?" I laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "I deserve the truth, Morgan. I didn't deserve a life built on a lie. Our house, our vacations, everything, ... It's all just winnings. It's not real. It is real." She insisted, stepping towards me. "The money is real. I'm good at this, Sadie. I'm one of the best. This is a job. It's just a different kind of market." She tried to take my hand, but I pulled away. "Don't." I said ... "Don't touch me. I don't know who you are." And that was the truth of it. The poker wasn't the ultimate betrayal. The lie was. The fact that she had looked me in the eye every day and pretended to be someone else. The fact that she had constructed an elaborate, false reality and invited me to live in it with her. She hadn't cheated on me with another person. She had cheated on me with a whole other life. That night began the longest conversation of our lives. She laid it all out, the shame of being fired, the thrill of the first big win, the terror of the losses, the creation of the intricate web of lies to keep her secret safe. She wept. She begged for my forgiveness. She swore she would never lie to me again, and I was left with an impossible choice. The woman I loved was standing in front of me, stripped of all her secrets. The foundation of our life was a lie, but the love, I thought, was real. Wasn't it? Could I stay? Could I accept this new reality, this life of high stakes and uncertainty? Could I live with a gambler? For a week, I lived in a state of suspended animation. We coexisted in the beautiful house her winnings had paid for. She was desperately attentive, endlessly apologetic. She showed me the websites, the math, the strategy. She tried to make me understand her world, but I couldn't. My world was about tangible things, the weight of a book, the warmth of a kill, the steady, reliable rhythm of a life built on truth. Her world was about risk, deception, and the turn of a card. The final decision came to me one rainy afternoon in my bookstore. I was surrounded by the stories of 1,000 lives, all of them bound and real, and I knew I couldn't live in a fiction. No matter how beautiful the cover, I loved her. I would probably always love her, but I couldn't live her lie. When she came home that night, I had my bags packed, / Sadie. No, she whispered, her face crumbling. Please, we can make this work. I can't, Morgan, I said, my own tears finally falling. I can't live on a bluff. I need something real. I moved into the small apartment above my bookstore. It was a tiny space, filled with my books and the smell of paper. It was a smaller life, a quieter life, but it was mine. It was real. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is asleep, I think of her. I picture her in some secret, smoke-filled room, her face an unreadable mask. Calculating the odds, I hope she wins. I truly do. But I know now that my greatest wealth is not in a jackpot or a lucky hand. It's in the quiet, steady truth of my own story. And finally, I am the one who gets to write the last page. I moved into the small apartment above my bookstore. It was a tiny space, filled with my books and the smell of paper. It was a smaller life, quieter life, but it was mine. It was real. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is asleep, I think of her. I picture her in some secret, smoke-filled room, her face an unreadable mask. Calculating the odds, I hope she wins. I truly do. But I know now that my greatest wealth is not in a jackpot or a lucky hand. It's in the quiet, steady truth of my own story. And finally, I am the one who gets to write the last page. Before I packed my bags during that impossible week of indecision, Morgan tried to bridge the chasm between us. She tried to make me understand. It's a world of skill. Sadie, she'd insisted, her voice earnest. It's psychology and statistics. And nerve. It's not just luck. To prove it, she took me to a game, not one of the underground, high-stakes games she played in, but a legal, public tournament in a nearby casino. Just to see. She pleaded .. So you don't think of me as some back alley degenerate. The casino was a nightmare of noise and flashing lights. It felt like a physical assault. The air was stale with desperation and cheap perfume. Morgan, however, navigated it with the ease of a fish in water. She was recognized. People nodded at her, their eyes showing a mixture of respect and fear. She wasn't Morgan Vance, my wife, here. She was someone else, a name I'd seen on the forums on her secret laptop. Moxie. We stood behind a velvet rope. Watching a final table, the players were stone-faced, their expressions unreadable. The silence at the table was more intense than any sound in the casino. Morgan leaned close to me, her breath warm against my ear, whispering a running commentary. See him? She'd murmur, pointing to a man with twitching eyes. He's bluffing. His tell is that he overblinks when he's weak. Her, she'd say, indicating a woman with a mountain of chips .. She's a rock, only plays premium hands. The trick is to steal her blinds. She spoke this foreign language with a fluency that chilled me. She saw things I couldn't see, the subtle shifts in posture, the minute hesitations, the secret language of lies and tells. I felt like an anthropologist, observing a strange, predatory tribe. The confrontation happened the next night. I couldn't wait. I couldn't spend another minute. Playing the part of the unsuspecting wife, I waited for her to come home, to shed her power suit costume. I found her in the kitchen, pouring a glass of wine. How was your day at the office? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. She turned, a smile on her face that faltered when she saw my expression. It was fine, she said cautiously. Long day. Unsure, I said. Is it hard to keep track of it all? The market. Fluctuations, the big bluffs. I saw that flicker of panic in her eyes again. This time it stayed. What are you talking about, Sadie? I know, Morgan, I said, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion that was raging inside me. I know about Argentum Holdings. I know about the trips to Macau that you called investor conferences. I know that you don't work for Sterling Gables. I know that you haven't for 3 years. She leaned back against the counter, the wine glass held tightly in her hand. All the color drained from her face. The mask was gone. For the first time in years, I felt like I was seeing the real her, and she was terrified. How? She whispered, Sadie, I can explain. Can you? I asked, can you explain why you let me believe our life was built on a salary when it was built on a deck of cards? Can you explain the sheer arrogance it took to lie to me every single day for 3 years? I was ashamed. She finally burst out, her voice cracking. I got fired, Sadie. I was laid off, and I was too proud, too ashamed to tell. I failed. I didn't know what to do. So you started gambling? I was always good at it, she said, her voice dropping. I started small, online, and I won. I kept winning. I won enough to cover the bills, to keep things normal. I was protecting you. I was trying to give you the life you deserved. The life I deserved. I laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. I deserved the truth, Morgan. I didn't deserve a life built on a lie. Our house, our vacations, everything, ... It's all just. Winnings, it's not real. This is real. She insisted, stepping towards me. The money is real. I'm good at this, Sadie. I'm one of the best. This is a job. It's just a different kind of market. She tried to take my hand, but I pulled away. Don't. I said ... Don't touch me. I don't know who you are. And that was the truth of it. The poker wasn't the ultimate betrayal. The lie was. The fact that she had looked me in the eye every day and pretended to be someone else. The fact that she had constructed an elaborate, false reality and invited me to live in it with her. She hadn't cheated on me with another person. She had cheated on me with a whole other life. That night began the longest conversation of our lives. She laid it all out. The shame of being fired. The thrill of the first big win. The terror of the losses. The creation of the intricate web of lies to keep her secret safe. She wept. She begged for my forgiveness. She swore she would never lie to me again, and I was left with an impossible choice. The woman I loved was standing in front of me, stripped of all her secrets. The foundation of our life was a lie, but the love, I thought, was real. Wasn't it? Could I stay? Could I accept this new reality, this life of high stakes and uncertainty? Could I live with a gambler? For a week, I lived in a state of suspended animation. We coexisted in the beautiful house her winnings had paid for. She was desperately attentive, endlessly apologetic. She showed me the websites, the math, the strategy. She tried to make me understand her world, but I couldn't. My world was about tangible things. The weight of a book, the warmth of a kill, the steady, reliable rhythm of a life built on truth. Her world was about risk, deception, and the turn of a card. The final decision came to me one rainy afternoon in my bookstore. I was surrounded by the stories of 1,000 lives. All of them, bound and real, and I knew I couldn't live in a fiction. No matter how beautiful the cover, I loved her. I would probably always love her, but I couldn't live her lie. When she came home that night, I had my bags packed ... Sadie. No, she whispered, her face crumbling. Please, we can make this work. I can't, Morgan, I said, my own tears finally falling. I can't live on a bluff. I need something real. I moved into the small apartment above my bookstore. It was a tiny space, filled with my books and the smell of paper. It was a smaller life, a quieter life, but it was mine. It was real. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is asleep, I think of her. I picture her in some secret, smoke-filled room, her face an unreadable mask. Calculating the odds, I hope she wins. I truly do. But I know now that my greatest wealth is not in a jackpot or a lucky hand. It's in the quiet, steady truth of my own story. And finally, I am the one who gets to write the last page. I moved into the small apartment above my bookstore. It was a tiny space, filled with my books and the smell of paper. It was a smaller life, a quieter life, but it was mine. It was real. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is asleep, I think of her. I picture her in some secret, smoke-filled room, her face an unreadable mask. Calculating the odds, I hope she wins. I truly do. But I know now that my greatest wealth is not in a jackpot or a lucky hand. It's in the quiet, steady truth of my own story. And finally, I am the one who gets to write the last page. Before I packed my bags during that impossible week of indecision, Morgan tried to bridge the chasm between us. She tried to make me understand. It's a world of skill. Sadie, she'd insisted, her voice earnest. It's psychology and statistics. And nerve. It's not just luck. To prove it, she took me to a game, not one of the underground, high-stakes games she played in, but a legal, public tournament and nearby casino. Just to see. She pleaded ... so you don't think of me as some back alley degenerate. The casino was a nightmare of noise and flashing lights. It felt like a physical assault. The air was stale with desperation and cheap perfume. Morgan, however, navigated it with the ease of a fish in water. She was recognized. People nodded at her, their eyes showing a mixture of respect and fear. She wasn't Morgan Vance, my wife. Here. She was someone else, a name I'd seen on the forums on her secret laptop. Moxie. We stood behind a velvet rope. Watching the final table, the players were stone-faced, their expressions unreadable. The silence at the table was more intense than any sound in the casino. Morgan leaned close to me, her breath warm against my ear, whispering the running commentary. See him? She'd murmur, pointing to a man with twitching eyes. He's bluffing. His tell is that he overblinks when he's weak. Her, she'd say, indicating a woman with a mountain of chips ... She's a rock, only plays premium hands. The trick is to steal her blinds. She spoke this foreign language with a fluency that chilled me. She saw things I couldn't see, the subtle shifts in posture, the minute hesitations, the secret language of lies and tells. I felt like an anthropologist, observing a strange predatory tribe. The confrontation, when it finally happened, was even more brutal than I had imagined. After I laid out my evidence, she tried every tactic. When shame and pleading didn't work, she turned to anger. And what about you, Sadie? She spat, her eyes flashing. You didn't seem to mind the winnings when we were flying first class to Italy, did you? You didn't question the money when I was renovating your precious bookstore? You loved the life, you just didn't want to know the price. You're a hypocrite. That life was a lie. I shouted back, my voice raw. It was a story you told me, and I believed it because I loved you and trusted you. That's not hypocrisy, Morgan. That's called being married. The argument raged for hours, circling the same drain of her lies and my shattered trust. Eventually, we were just too exhausted, heartbroken people sitting in the wreckage of our life, which led to that impossible week of indecision. During that week, a certified letter arrived at the bookstore. The building had been sold. My lease would be honored for 6 more months, after which the rent would be tripled. The new owner, a faceless development corporation, was clearly trying to force out the small, independent tenants. I sat in my office, the letter shaking in my hand. It was a death sentence for the last page. That very night, Morgan came home with the news of her massive win, the offer to quit, the money that appeared in my bank account. It was enough to buy the building outright, to secure my dream forever. The temptation was a physical thing, a sickness in my gut. She was offering me a lifeboat, a solution to the one problem that felt as devastating as her betrayal. All I had to do was accept. Accept the money, accept the lie it was built on, accept her. That was the context for her taking me to the casino. It wasn't just a tour, it was a sales pitch. See, this world you're afraid of, it can save the one thing you love most. That night, when Jimmy the Shark gave me that pitying, appraiser's look, it felt different. He wasn't just looking at Moxie's strange, out-of-place wife. He was looking at a potential mark, a problem that could be solved with a big enough stack of chips. And in his eyes, I saw the soul-deep weariness of that world, the constant calculation, the endless hustle, the utter lack of solid ground. After that visit, I spent a full day just sitting in my house, our house. I didn't go to the bookstore. I walked through the rooms, touching the expensive furniture, the silk rugs, the original art on the walls. It was a beautiful cage. I tried to enjoy it, tried to imagine accepting her offer. We could save the store, travel the world, live a life of incredible freedom. All it would cost was my own sense of truth, my soul. I realized that afternoon that I would rather lose the bookstore than find it with her money, because it wouldn't be my bookstore anymore. It would be hers, another asset purchased with a lucky hand. My final conversation with Morgan was quiet, steeped in the sadness of a foregone conclusion. "I know," she said, her voice thick. "I saw your face at the tournament. You looked at me like I was a monster." "I didn't see a monster," I said, my voice gentle. "I saw a stranger, a brilliant, successful, lonely stranger, and I don't know how to be married to her." Living above the bookstore was an adjustment, but it was a life of my own making. I launched a Save the Last Page campaign. The community rallied around me. It was humbling and beautiful. We held fundraisers. Local artists sold work and gave me a commission. We wouldn't have enough to buy the building, but we had enough to survive, to fight. We had enough to be real. About a year after I left, the postcard from Monte Carlo arrived. And I held it in my hand and I thought about the choice I had made. The choice between a beautiful, precarious fiction and a difficult, messy truth. I smiled. I tucked the postcard into the pages of an old, leather-bound copy of The Great Gatsby. A few months after that, Clara, my wise, wonderful Clara, passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her daughter came into the store with a small, unassuming box. "My mother wanted you to have this," she said. Inside was not money. It was Clara's personal collection of first edition poetry, signed copies from authors I revered. It was a treasure beyond price. Tucked inside one of the books was a note, written in her shaky, elegant script, for the girl who is building her house on solid ground. "Every story needs a strong foundation. With love, Clara." I closed the shop early that day. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the books, and I cried, not with sadness for what I had lost, but with a profound, overwhelming gratitude for what I had found. My life was smaller now. My world was quieter, but it was built on the love of friends, the loyalty of a community, and the tangible, beautiful truth of stories on a page. It was a house with a foundation that could never be shaken. .. And it was all mine. The campaign to save the last page became my life's new narrative. It was a story written not by one person, but by a community. We held bake sales that smelled of cinnamon and hope. We hosted local authors for readings. their words filling the small space with magic. People volunteered to paint walls, fix shelves, and run the counter when I needed a break. They didn't just donate money, they donated their time, their belief. It was the antithesis of Morgan's world. Her success was a solitary, zero-sum game played in secret. My fight for survival was loud, collaborative, and deeply public. One evening, as we were closing up after a poetry slam fundraiser, a well-dressed woman I didn't recognize approached me. "You're Sadie Vance, correct?" she asked, her voice crisp and professional. I confirmed, my heart sinking a little, assuming she was from the new development company. "Here to deliver more bad news. My name is Anjali Sharma," she said, handing me a card. "I'm on the board of the City Arts Council. We've been following your campaign, what you've built here, the way this community has rallied. It's the kind of cultural anchor this city needs more of, not less." She smiled. "The developer who bought this block is seeking council approval for a new high-rise, a project that requires a certain amount of community goodwill to get fast-tracked. It seems they've realized that evicting a beloved local bookstore is bad optics." She told me their office had called her that morning. They were prepared to offer me a new 5-year lease with a rent increase that was modest and manageable. We hadn't won by buying the building. We had won by showing it was priceless. As Anjali left, I leaned back against a shelf of biographies, the spines of 100 lives pressing into my back, and I felt the profound, uncheckable strength of roots taking hold in solid ground. A few months later, a young man came into the store. He couldn't have been more than 25. He had the haunted, hollowed-out look of someone who hadn't slept in days. He wandered the aisles aimlessly before collapsing into the worn armchair in the corner, the one Clara had always favored. He didn't pick up a book. He just stared into space. After an hour, I brought him a cup of tea. "Tough day?" I asked gently. He looked up at me, his eyes full of a shame so deep it was painful to see. He shook his head, and then the story just spilled out of him. He was a graduate student. He'd saved up his stipend for years. He'd gotten into online poker, thinking he was smart enough to beat the odds. He'd had a few early wins, and the thrill was intoxicating. Then he found himself at a high-stakes online table with a player who dismantled him. "She never said a word," he whispered, his voice cracking. "She just took everything, every chip. Her name was Moxie. They say she's a legend, a shark. She didn't just take my money, she took my future." My blood ran cold. I felt the ghost of Morgan in the room, a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. I was looking at the collateral damage, the real-world cost of her incredible winnings. I saw the other side of the coin, the face of the person whose ruin had paid for my trip to Italy, for the beautiful art on my walls. I sat with the young man for a long time. I gave him tea and listened. I recommended a book on behavioral economics and gave him the number for a Gamblers Anonymous meeting. When he left, he looked a little less haunted, a little more human. I realized then that my experience with Morgan hadn't just been a story of my own survival. It had given me a new kind of empathy, a new understanding of the fictions people build for themselves and the devastating price of their collapse. Years have passed. The bookstore is still here. It is my anchor, my haven, my quiet corner of a loud world. The apartment above, it is home. It is filled with the warmth of books, the love of friends, and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived authentically. I still have the postcard from Monte Carlo, tucked into the pages of Gatsby. Sometimes I take it out. I look at the 2 words, all in, and I feel a pang, not of longing, but of a complex, sorrowful forgiveness. Morgan was a gambler. It wasn't a flaw in her character. It was her character. She was always all in, whether on a stock, a bluff, or a life. Her tragedy was that she could never distinguish between them. I have learned to live with smaller stakes, to find joy not in the jackpot, but in the daily draw, the morning light through my window, the smell of rain on pavement, dot slash slash, the perfect sentence in a book I've read a dozen times. My life is not a high-stakes game. It is a well-tended garden, and in the quiet hum of the everyday. I have found a truth more valuable than any pot of gold. I have found that the richest wins are not the ones that leave others with nothing. They are the small, shared victories that help everyone grow. My story is no longer about her or what I lost. It is about me and the quiet, sturdy, beautiful things I have built in its place. My practice thrived. My life, once a shared fortress, became my own quiet, peaceful garden. I sit in my office now, and I listen to the stories people tell me. I hear the echoes of my own experience and their narratives of betrayal and deception. But I am not broken. I am not a victim. The experience left a scar, a thin white line on my psyche. But a scar is a sign of healing. It is a map of where you've been. And as a cartographer of the soul, I know that you can't chart a course for the future without first understanding the terrain of the past. And my map, finally, is my own during the long, cold winter of my investigation. Living with Jules was like performing a delicate, dangerous surgery on myself without anesthesia. The psychological games I played, the casual questions about spas, the pointed mentions of Genevieve had their intended effect. Jules, who was accustomed to being the one in control, began to feel watched. Her perfect composure developed a hairline fracture, and in a move of breathtaking audacity, she decided to seize control of the narrative of my unhappiness. "Aris," she said one evening, her voice a mask of loving concern. We were in the living room, the city lights glittering like a diamond necklace below us. "I'm worried about you. You've been so distant lately, so brittle. I think we should talk to someone." I looked at her, my expression carefully neutral. "Talk to someone?" "A therapist," she said, nodding. "A third party to help us navigate this rough patch, to help you work through whatever is bothering you." It was a masterstroke of manipulation. She was casting me as the identified patient, our marital problems as a symptom of my anxiety. She was trying to put me under a different professional microscope, one she thought she could control. To refuse would be to admit I was hiding something. To agree was to step onto the most bizarre stage of my life. "Okay," I said, my voice calm. "If you think it will help, Jules, I'll make an appointment." Dr. Albright's office was decorated in calming shades of blue and gray. She was a competent, kind-faced woman in her 50s, and as I sat on her comfortable sofa, next to my wife, the woman who was actively planning to leave me for her protege, had to suppress a wave of hysterical laughter. The irony was suffocating. "So, what brings you both here today?" Dr. Albright asked, her smile encouraging. Jules took the lead. Of course, she spoke eloquently about her concern for me. She mentioned my increased stress, my withdrawal. She painted a picture of a loving, worried wife at a loss as to how to help her struggling partner. She was compelling. She was believable. She was performing for an audience of one, and she was nailing it. Then Dr. Albright turned her kind eyes to me, dot slash slash. "Aris, how do you see it?" My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the ultimate test, to articulate my feelings without revealing the one central truth that was the source of all of them. "I have been feeling disconnected," I began, choosing my words with surgical precision. "There's a lack of transparency in our communication lately. I feel as though there are narratives running that I am not privy to." I was speaking in my own professional jargon, a coded message that only I could understand. "Sometimes," I continued, looking directly at Jules, "it feels like the person I'm married to is rehearsing for a different role, and I haven't been given the script." I saw a flicker of unease in Jules's eyes. My words were too close to the bone. Dr. Albright, however, simply nodded dot slash slash. That's a very powerful metaphor. A race. Let's explore that. We spent the rest of the hour exploring my metaphor, the three of us dancing around the black hole of the truth. I left the session feeling drained, and with a new chilling appreciation for the depth of my wife's duplicity, the silent. War at home was punctuated by periods of excruciating public performance. Jules's company held an annual awards dinner, a lavish affair I was expected to attend. "You have to come," she'd said. "It won't look right if you don't." It was all about optics dot slash slash always. So I put on a designer dress and I went. The ballroom was a sea of expensive suits and forced smiles. Genevieve was there. Of course she was. She was accepting an award for Innovator of the Year, an award I now knew Jules had engineered for her. I watched her on the stage, her face bright and flushed with success, thanking Jules profusely for her mentorship. I couldn't have done it without her. Genevieve gushed, looking out into the crowd directly at our table. "She's more than a boss. She's an inspiration." The applause was deafening. I clapped along, my hands feeling like blocks of wood. Later, I found myself face to face with Genevieve by the bar. "Dr. Thorne," she said, her smile wide and confident. "It's so good to see you." "Jules talks about you all the time. Does she?" I asked, my voice cool. "She's just the most incredible woman," Genevieve continued, her eyes shining with adoration. "I don't know how she does it all. The company, the travel. Being married to a successful woman like you, it must be a lot." "My success has never been a burden to my wife," I replied. My gaze level. I saw a flash of confusion in her eyes. She was young, she was ambitious, and she was ambitious. Pawn in a game she didn't fully understand. She saw me as the first wife, the relic. She had no idea I was also the judge and jury. The strain of living this double life began to take its toll. My nights were sleepless. My days were a tightrope walk of emotional suppression. One evening, after a particularly difficult day of sessions where two different patients had described being gaslit by their partners, I felt my own composure begin to crumble. I was searching for a book in our library when my hand brushed against a small, lacquered box on a high shelf. I opened it. Inside was a collection of mementos from the first year of our relationship, a dried corsage from a college dance, ticket stubs from the first movie we ever saw, a silly photo of us from a photo booth, our faces young and full of a hope that now looked like naivete. I sank to the floor. The contents of the box spread around me, and the clinical detachment I had clung to like a life raft finally gave way. A sob tore from my chest. Raw and ragged, the grief was overwhelming, not for the woman Jules was now, but for the woman I thought she had been, for the 15 years of memories that were now contaminated, rewritten with a new toxic subtext, for the love I had, believed in, a love that was now revealed to be, at least in part, a grand, strategic performance. I sat there on the floor and wept, not like a psychologist, but like a woman whose heart had been shattered. The moment of weakness passed. I packed the mementos back in the box, pushed it to the back of the highest shelf, and rebuilt my walls. But the crack was there, a reminder that I was human, and that my time for observation was running out. After I overheard the future wife comment outside Genevieve's apartment, my grief hardened into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. The observation phase was over. The intervention was planned. The kitchen confrontation was exactly as I had designed it, brutal, clinical, and final. Jules crumbled, not under the weight of emotion, but under the weight of irrefutable data. The legal process began the following week. We met in a sterile conference room at my lawyer's firm. Jules was there with her own high-priced attorney. She looked pale and diminished. Stripped of her usual charismatic armor, her lawyer tried to argue for a more favorable settlement. citing her significant contributions to our shared assets. My lawyer, a sharp, sensible woman named Eleanor, simply slid a single printed out email across the table. It was the one where Jules discussed using company funds to pay for the spa resort where she and Genevieve had stayed. Jules's lawyer read it, his face paling. Jules made one last desperate attempt. She looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. "Iris, please," she whispered across the polished table. "Think of everything we built. Don't let it end like this, in a room full of lawyers. Don't I mean more to you than this?" I looked at her, and I felt nothing. The woman trying to manipulate me now was the same one who had rehearsed the end of my life in her office. "The meaning I assigned to you?" "Jules," I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the silent room, "was based on a fraudulent prospectus. The asset has been reevaluated and found to have no value. We're simply liquidating." I stood at that slash, "Give her whatever she signed to make this go away, Eleanor." And I walked out of the room without looking back. The aftermath was a strange kind of liberation. After the rage, after the grief, after the demolition of her office came a profound quiet. I had expected to feel lonely adrift in the large, minimalist house. Instead, I felt a sense of expansion. The house was no longer ours. It was mine. The silence was no longer tense. It was peaceful. I began the slow process of reclaiming the space, not with violence, but with life. I filled the empty rooms with plants. I painted a wall in my new studio a vibrant, joyful shade of yellow. I hosted small, quiet dinner parties with my own friends. I continued my sessions with Lena Petrova, my mentor. We talked about the case, about Jules, a key feature of the narcissistic personality. Lena reminded me is the inability to see others as separate, whole beings. They are merely props in the narcissist's own drama. You cease to be a satisfactory prop, Aris, so she recast the role. "I know," I said, "but it's a bitter pill to swallow that your greatest love was merely a casting choice." "Perhaps," Luna said, her wise eyes twinkling, "but you must also acknowledge your own role. You were not just a prop. You were the audience, the critic, and, in the end, the playwright who took back control of the story. You wrote the final act, and that is a powerful thing." She was right. My life had been a story I thought I was co-authoring, only to find out I was just a character slated to be killed off. But I had refused my fate. I had grabbed the pen. The final scene, the one I live in now, is quiet. There are no dramatic plot twists, no new lovers, just the steady, peaceful rhythm of my own life. My practice is thriving. I am good at what I do. My own journey through the heart of a calculated darkness has made me a better guide for others lost in their own. Last week, a new patient sat across from me, a young man, full of anxiety. "I just feel like I'm going crazy," he said. "My wife, she's so smart, so logical, She keeps telling me I'm misremembering things, that I'm being too sensitive. She says I'm the one with the problem." I leaned forward, my voice soft but clear. "Tell me everything," I said. "Start from the very beginning." And as I began to listen, I felt a profound sense of purpose. I was no longer just the cartographer. I was the keeper of the lighthouse, and I was here to guide the ships away from the rocks. My own ship had navigated that treacherous passage, and now I was home. My own ship had navigated that treacherous passage, and now I was home. 2 years passed. The quiet of my life became a comfortable, welcome presence. The yellow wall in my studio was a constant source of soft light. My practice was full, my work meaningful. Then, one evening, an email appeared in my inbox from a name I had not expected to see again. Genevieve. My breath caught. My first instinct was to delete it, to not allow any part of that old story to intrude upon my new piece. But my clinical curiosity, the part of me that had saved my life, won out. I opened it. The message was short. Dr. Thorne. It began. The formality is stark contrast to the chaos she had been a part of. I know there is no reason for you to read this, and even less for you to believe it. But I feel I must write it anyway. I wanted to apologize. Not to ask for forgiveness, as I know I have no right to it, but to offer a sincere and belated apology for my role in the pain that was caused. I was young, ambitious, and I allowed myself to believe in a narrative that was expertly crafted for me. It took me 2 years, but my partnership with Jules was also, as you might say, sunsetted. I was divested. I see now that I was not her partner. I was simply the next acquisition in a long portfolio. Seeing it from the other side, I am in awe of your strength and clarity. You were not a victim. You were a diagnostician who correctly identified the pathology. I hope you are well. I hope you are at peace. Sincerely, Genevieve. I read the email 3 times. There was no malice in it. Only the weary tone of someone who had also been put through the crucible. I felt a strange, quiet sense of closure. I had not needed her apology to heal. But it was ... data. A final confirmation of my diagnosis. I typed back a single sentence. Thank you. Genevieve. I wish you peace as well. Then I deleted her email and archived my reply. The file was now truly closed. 5 years after the divorce, I stood on a small stage in a crowded bookstore. A microphone in front of me, .. The warmth of the lights felt less like a spotlight and more like an embrace. In my hands was a copy of my own book. It wasn't a memoir. It was a clinical work titled The Echo Chamber, Identifying and Surviving Narcissistic Abuse in Intimate Relationships. It was a collection of anonymized case studies, patterns of behavior, and strategies for healing. My own story was in there, of course, stripped of its personal details and rendered as Case Study A, the narrative of a woman who used her partner's own patterns of control and deception to map a path to freedom. My mentor, Lena Petrova, was in the front row, her eyes shining with pride. As I began my speech, I thought of the other speech, the one I had overheard through a closed door all those years ago. Jules had rehearsed. A speech of divestment, of erasure. Now I was giving a speech of reclamation. I spoke of the power of narrative, of the importance of trusting one's own perception, of the quiet strength it takes to walk away from a beautifully constructed fiction. The most profound act of rebellion, I concluded, my voice clear and steady, is not to destroy the echo chamber created by another. It is to build a room of your own, with your own voice, and to learn to trust the sound of it above all others. The applause, when it came, felt like a validation not of my pain, but of my survival. Last night, nearly a decade after I walked out of that lawyer's office, I was watering the orchids in my sunroom. The house was quiet, filled with the soft glow of my reading lamps and the sun of night blooming. Jasmine from the garden. My phone buzzed with a news alert from a financial journal I subscribed to. The headline was stark. Tech visionary Julian Vance indicted on fraud charges. Startup implodes amidst allegations of deception. I opened the article. It detailed a massive scheme, a web of lies told to investors, faked profit reports, a spectacular collapse that had wiped out hundreds of millions of dollars. It described Jules's charisma, her ability to make anyone believe anything. It quoted a former employee who called her a master storyteller. I read the entire article with a distant, clinical sadness. There was no triumph, no sense of victory or vindication. It was simply the predictable, inevitable final act of a play I had seen before. The pattern, once established, had repeated itself on a grander stage, with higher stakes, but with the same tragic conclusion. A narcissist, left unchecked, will eventually create an echo chamber, so vast it collapses under the weight of its own emptiness. I closed the phone. I looked at my orchid. A perfect, intricate flower, real and alive in my hands. I felt the solid ground beneath my feet, and I felt a profound, uncheckable peace. The ghost was not just gone. It was as if she had never been there at all. My life was my own. The narrative was mine. And the silence in my house was finally just silence.